Why is it that the more you give, the faster she pulls away? Why does total devotion often breed indifference? Here's a brutal truth few dare to confront. A woman's ego, if left unchallenged, will quietly suffocate her desire for you. Because when you make her the center of your world, you strip yourself of mystery, of strength, of value. And what is easily possessed is rarely desired. The secret is not cruelty, it's restraint. It's your ability to withhold validation, to remain grounded in your own worth, to create the space where her mind starts to question, to wonder, to crave your attention. This isn't manipulation. This is understanding the psychology of desire. Hurt the ego, not through harm, but through controlled distance. And in that space, obsession is born. The question is simple. Are you strong enough to hold that tension? Or will you collapse like so many men who never understand the power they surrender? Why is it that the moment you stop chasing, she suddenly starts to notice you? Why does pulling away ignite an obsession that relentless pursuit never could? It's because the ego fundamentally craves control. And when you deny it control, you become the puzzle she cannot solve. That's the brutal paradox. Most men don't understand this. They think that by pouring affection endlessly, by constantly validating, constantly reassuring, they'll secure love, loyalty, and admiration. But they're wrong, tragically wrong, because what they're feeding isn't love. It's the ego's demand for predictable dominance. Let me be absolutely clear. The ego does not fall in love with what it already owns. The ego obsesses over what it cannot fully possess. When you constantly submit to a woman's need for validation, you make yourself predictable. You give her full control over your emotional state. And in that predictability, the mystery dies. The tension dies. The obsession dies. You become another man she can easily read, easily control, easily discard. And here's where most men fall apart. They confuse love with compliance. They confuse devotion with subservience. They become so desperate to be accepted that they sacrifice the very qualities that made them valuable in the first place. Do you want to know why some men haunt a woman's mind long after they're gone? It's because those men never surrendered their sovereignty. They never allowed their self-worth to be determined by her reactions. They didn't collapse into emotional neediness the moment she grew distant. Instead, they stood firm. They became unpredictable, not as a manipulative tactic, but as a reflection of their genuine self-respect. Their internal stability became untouchable. And that right there is what drives the ego insane. It cannot tolerate uncertainty. It cannot handle not having full control over your attention. And so it obsesses. You see, this isn't about playing games. This is about understanding psychological reality. The ego feeds on certainty, on dominance, on knowing it can pull the strings at will. But when you refuse to let your emotional world be controlled by someone else's moods, you force the ego into a state of scarcity. And scarcity breeds value. Scarcity breeds obsession. Because now she must grapple with the unsettling fact that you're not emotionally dependent on her. You're capable of walking away. And that possibility, that haunting possibility, is what anchors you permanently in her psyche. Now let's consider the alternative. The weak man, the man who compromises his dignity for approval, the man who texts a dozen times when she's silent, the man who apologizes for imaginary offenses just to keep her happy, the man who thinks that endless accommodation is the road to love. That man is not loved. He's tolerated until he's discarded, because his very desperation repels the very desire he's chasing. He has made himself too easy, too available, too known. And nothing kills attraction faster than absolute predictability. Do you understand the gravity of that? Your neediness is not compassion. Your desperation is not love. It's emotional self-destruction disguised as devotion. And worse, it kills her respect for you. And without respect, obsession cannot exist. Without respect, love itself suffocates. You must become a man who does not flinch in the face of distance, a man who can maintain his center when she tests you, because she will test you. not out of cruelty, but because unconsciously she is searching for evidence of your strength. She wants to know that you can hold your own, that you are not so fragile, that you crumble the moment she withdraws. And if you fail that test, you lose her mind forever. So here's the truth you must burn into your soul. The man who commands respect is the man who can walk away. The man who does not beg. The man who does not plead. The man who does not make his worth conditional upon her approval. And when you embody that, when you stand in that storm with unshakable calm, you will haunt her thoughts like a question she can never fully answer. That is the secret. That is the obsession. That is the power. Why do so many men hand away their power the moment they feel affection? Why do they assume that pouring out endless validation will somehow anchor a woman's love? Let me tell you something brutally true. Validation is cheap. Self-containment is rare. And what is rare is valuable. What is common is discarded. Most men operate under a tragic illusion. They believe that if they can just give enough, reassure enough, sacrifice enough, they will finally secure the love they crave. But love rooted in desperation is not love at all. It's a transaction. A trade of dignity for temporary comfort. And comfort without respect is nothing more than slow emotional death. Women do not fall for the man who abandons himself to please her. They fall for the man who respects himself so completely that he cannot be bought with fleeting approval. The man who can stand in silence. The man who does not collapse when affection is withheld. The man whose emotional stability is not dependent on her mood swings or her need for attention. That man becomes an enigma. And the human mind is obsessed with what it cannot easily understand or control. Do you want to know why she starts to think about you more when you pull back? It's because her ego suddenly feels the sting of uncertainty. She begins to question her own value in your eyes. And in that uncertainty, a powerful dynamic unfolds. She becomes the one seeking reassurance. The very validation you once handed over freely is now the prize she pursues. When you're self-contained, you become dangerous, not because you intend harm, but because you cannot be emotionally manipulated. You are not reactive, you are deliberate. You know your worth independent of her approval. And that terrifies the ego, because the ego thrives on control. It feeds on the ability to provoke a reaction, to pull your strings like a puppet master. But when you refuse to dance, you force her into a psychological corner where she must confront her own insecurities. Contrast that with the weak man. The man who lives in a constant state of emotional servitude. He sends message after message when she's distant. He apologizes for things he hasn't done. He sacrifices his boundaries to keep her happy. And in doing so, he becomes utterly predictable, utterly controllable, utterly forgettable. Because when you require constant reassurance, you are confessing your own lack of worth. You are telling her with every needy word and action that you do not believe you are enough without her constant affirmation. And nothing is more unattractive than a man who does not believe in his own value. Real power is found in restraint, in the ability to sit with discomfort without desperately seeking to resolve it through validation, in the capacity to remain grounded even when the emotional winds rage around you, because that restraint signals to her subconscious that you are not desperate, you are not weak, you are not chasing. And what we do not chase often ends up chasing us. You see, obsession is not born from abundance. It is born from scarcity, from mystery, from the unsettling realization that she does not have full access to your emotional world. And the more you practice self-containment, the more valuable your presence becomes. But this requires strength, immense strength. It requires you to confront your own fears of abandonment, your own craving for approval, your own insecurities that whisper you are not enough. You must stand against those inner voices and declare that your value is not up for negotiation. Because in the end, the man who cannot be controlled emotionally is the man who commands respect. And respect is the foundation upon which genuine attraction is built. The man who can hold his center when others lose theirs becomes unforgettable. He becomes the unresolved question in her mind, the mystery that lingers, the storm she cannot tame. And here's the final truth. The man who does not need her validation will always have her attention. Remember that. Let it burn into your soul. The man who needs nothing controls everything. Why does the man who gives everything often end up with nothing? Why does the man who makes himself fully available become invisible? It's because attention, like any resource, operates under the law of scarcity. The more you freely give it, the less it's worth. The less you offer it, the more its value rises. This is one of the most brutal psychological truths most people never understand. And because they don't understand it, they suffer. When you pour your attention endlessly onto a woman, when you make yourself constantly available, when you respond immediately, enthusiastically, desperately, what you are doing without realizing it is flooding the market. You are turning your attention into something common, something predictable, something she can count on without effort. And the human mind devalues what requires no effort to obtain. It's a law rooted in biology and evolutionary psychology. We are wired to assign value to what demands our energy, our focus, and our sacrifice. That which costs nothing means nothing. Now contrast that with scarcity. When your attention is rare, when it's not handed out like cheap currency, when a woman has to wonder when or if you'll engage, you create an environment of psychological tension. And tension is the foundation of desire. The unknown triggers the imagination. The uncertainty fuels emotional investment. She begins to ask herself questions. Why isn't he responding? Is he losing interest? Is there someone else? And in that mental loop, obsession begins. But this isn't about manipulation, it's about self-respect. Most men flood the market with their attention because they are terrified of losing her. They believe that constant presence equals security. That if they are always there, always available, always willing, they will prevent abandonment. But the exact opposite occurs. Their desperation becomes suffocating, their presence becomes a burden. Their predictability strips away all intrigue, all challenge, all value, and what follows? Disinterest, withdrawal, emotional death. Look at the weak man, the man who texts every hour, the man who apologizes for breathing wrong, the man who says yes when he means no, the man who rearranges his entire life around a woman's whims. What happens to him? He becomes invisible. She doesn't respect him, she doesn't desire him, because he has made himself too easy. And nothing kills desire like certainty. The strongest men throughout history have always been those who could walk away. The kings, the warriors, the men who knew their worth so deeply that they did not need to constantly remind others of it. Their attention was a gift, not a default setting. And because of that, it was treasured, desired, pursued. These men didn't play games. They lived by principle. They understood that attention is power, and power surrendered carelessly is power lost forever. You must understand this on a cellular level. Your attention is your currency. It signals your value. When you offer it without standards, you devalue both yourself and the person receiving it. When you offer it with restraint, with deliberation, you force others to confront your worth. You become the man she thinks about when she's alone, the man she cannot fully read, the man whose mind remains partially closed. And that mystery creates gravity. But this demands emotional discipline. It demands you face your own fear of loss, your own insecurity, your own craving for external validation. You must develop the strength to let silence speak for you, to let absence build curiosity, to let her experience the void your presence once filled. Because only then will she realize the true weight of your value. And here's the final truth that most men are too afraid to confront. The man who floods a woman with attention becomes noise. The man who makes his attention rare becomes music, and it is the music she will play over and over in her mind long after you've walked away. Have you ever asked yourself why certainty often kills desire, while uncertainty ignites it? Why is it that when you make yourself fully available, fully predictable, fully secure, you become less attractive, less desirable? Because emotional certainty is her drug, but withdrawal is the hook. And very few men have the strength to hold the line when that withdrawal begins. Most collapse, most give in, most chase, and in that very act of desperation, they destroy the attraction they're so desperate to preserve. You see, the female psyche operates on a paradox. On the surface, she desires security. She wants to know you're there. She wants to feel loved, protected, desired. But underneath, deep in the unconscious layers of her mind, she craves a challenge, a sense of unpredictability, a man who cannot be fully controlled. She needs to feel that you have options, that you possess the strength to stand alone if necessary. That tension creates emotional electricity. It activates parts of her brain that comfort and certainty simply cannot. Most men fail because they try to smother her with reassurance. They believe that if they eliminate every ounce of uncertainty, they will finally secure her devotion. But that's not love. That's fear wearing the mask of love. And fear never inspires respect. Instead, it breeds contempt. When you respond instantly, when you constantly chase, when you flood her with validation at every moment of silence, you're not building trust. You're feeding her ego and simultaneously starving her desire. Let me ask you something painful. Have you ever noticed that when you finally stop reaching out, she starts reaching back? When you finally grow silent, her curiosity awakens. That is not a game. That is biology. That is psychology. That is how desire functions. It thrives not in the warmth of absolute certainty, but in the fire of controlled tension. And only the disciplined man can maintain that tension without allowing his insecurities to destroy it. Look at the weak man, the man who cannot sit in the discomfort of not knowing, the man who floods her with messages the moment she grows distant, the man who apologizes for problems that don't exist. That man thinks he's showing love, but he's actually exposing his emotional fragility. He's revealing that his confidence is paper thin, dependent entirely on her immediate approval. And the moment she sees that weakness, her respect begins to evaporate. Contrast that with the man who holds his ground, the man who can sit in the silence without breaking, the man who allows her to feel the absence of his presence. That absence creates space. Space for reflection, space for uncertainty, space for desire to breathe and grow. And in that space, she begins to feel a pull, an unexplainable urge to reconnect. Not because you forced it, not because you begged for it, but because your restraint created emotional scarcity. And scarcity breeds value. This requires brutal emotional strength. It demands that you confront your own fears head on, the fear of losing her, the fear of rejection, the fear of being alone. Most men cannot face those fears. They fold under the weight of their own desperation. But the man who can embrace that discomfort, who can stand firm in the storm of uncertainty, becomes something rare, something powerful, something unforgettable. You must remember this simple but devastating truth. Emotional certainty is comfort, but comfort breeds complacency. Emotional uncertainty is tension, but tension breeds desire. And desire is what keeps her obsessed. The man who masters that balance becomes the man who never has to chase. Because once she feels the ache of your absence, once she experiences the void that only your presence can fill, she will chase you. And here's your final lesson. The man who can sit in silence longer than she can sit in doubt wins everything. Why do so many men fail to earn respect from the very women they love? Why do they give everything only to be left empty, discarded, forgotten? The answer is brutal. Respect is not given to the pleaser. It's reserved for the man who can walk away. And that is a truth most men are too weak to confront. They believe that by bending, by accommodating, by sacrificing themselves endlessly, they will finally secure love. But love, built on self-abandonment, is not love at all. It's slavery disguised as devotion. A woman cannot respect a man who makes her the center of his existence. She cannot admire the man who trades his dignity for her approval. The moment you compromise your values, your boundaries, your self-respect to keep her happy, you've already lost her. Because what you are communicating, whether you realize it or not, is that your worth depends on her validation. And no one respects what they can control completely. No one values what they can easily dominate. Look at the man who pleases. He says yes when he wants to say no. He tolerates disrespect to avoid conflict. He apologizes for things he hasn't done. He rearranges his life around her emotions, her needs, her whims. And every time he does it, he chips away at his own masculinity. He thinks he's earning love. What he's actually earning is silent contempt. Because deep down, she sees that he is weak. And weakness does not inspire desire, it kills it. Now consider the man who knows his worth. The man who stands on principle, the man who does not flinch when tested. He is not unkind. He is not cruel, but he is firm. He does not beg for affection. He does not tolerate disrespect. He knows that love without respect is hollow, and he would rather walk away than stay and be diminished. That man commands attention. That man commands desire, because his presence carries weight. His boundaries create gravity. You see, most men are terrified of loss. They believe that maintaining a relationship means never risking its end. But that's an illusion. The truth is, every time you sacrifice your self-respect to avoid losing her, you are guaranteeing that loss in slow motion. You may keep her physically for a time, but you will lose her emotionally. And once her respect for you dies, everything else will follow. A man's power is in his ability to leave the table when respect is no longer being served. That power isn't about playing games. It's not about manipulation. It's about internal strength. It's about being so grounded in your own worth that you do not need to chase what devalues you. And when a woman sees that strength, when she feels that you are not dependent on her validation, she is drawn to you. Because that strength is rare, and what is rare becomes valuable. But this requires immense courage. It demands that you face the deepest fears within you, the fear of rejection, of abandonment, of being alone. You must confront those shadows and emerge stronger, unmoved by the temporary loss of approval. You must be willing to walk away from any situation that costs you your dignity, because only then will you earn the respect that breeds genuine desire. Understand this: you cannot negotiate for respect. You cannot plead for it. You command it by who you are, by how you live, by the standards you refuse to compromise. And when you live that way, you become the man she thinks about long after you're gone, the man who stood his ground, the man who could not be broken, the man who could walk away. And here is the final truth. You must never forget, the man who is willing to lose her to keep himself will always be the man she cannot forget.